On a cold December morning in 1985, shoppers at a Kmart in Spanaway, Washington, were met with a disturbing scene. A toddler, barely able to speak, was seen wandering through the aisles. This drew concern from the employees and customers around her. No one could figure out how she had ended up there. When authorities arrived, they tried to get some information from the child. The only phrase she could utter was, "Mommy is in the trees." The statement raised immediate concern. How had this toddler ended up here? Where was her mother? And what did she mean by "Mommy is in the trees"? The authorities put her photo in the local paper with the hope that someone would come forward to identify her. It wasn't long before the child was recognized as Crystal by her grandmother, Louise. Louise took Crystal in. She noticed that the little girl seemed shaken, possibly by something she had witnessed. But what exactly had she seen, and where were her parents? The community was consumed by unsettling questions about what might have occurred. Days turned into weeks, and there was still no trace of Crystal's mother or father. The unsettling, mysterious words of a child hinted at something much darker, yet no one could quite piece together the puzzle. 2 months after Crystal was found, the case took a chilling turn. On a remote trail in the forests near Elba, Washington, a man walking his dog stumbled upon a disturbing find. The body of Crystal's mother, Diana Robertson, was found deep in the woods, stabbed 17 times. A tube sock was tied around her neck, a detail that puzzled investigators. Next to her body was an abandoned truck belonging to Mike Reamer, Diana's boyfriend and Crystal's father. The truck was covered in bloodstains, and inside was a handwritten note that simply read, "I love you, Diana." While the truck and Diana's body were found, Mike was nowhere to be seen. Investigators initially considered Mike a suspect. After all, just 2 months before, Mike had been arrested for domestic violence after a fight with Diana. There were questions about his temper, and this led police to consider whether Mike might have been responsible for Diana's murder. Mike wasn't the only person attracting attention. 4 months earlier, in the same forest, another couple, Stephen Harkins and Ruth Cooper, who had been camping in the area, was found brutally murdered. Stephen was found shot to death in his sleeping bag, while Ruth's body was discovered later, strung-lit, with a tube sock tied around her neck, similar to Diana. The striking similarities between the cases raised the terrifying possibility of a serial killer haunting the woods. The weeks following Diana's discovery were filled with uncertainty. Mike's whereabouts remained unknown. Was he a victim, or was he the killer? Investigators were divided. On one hand, Mike knew the woods well, having spent much of his time there as a trapper. He had both the knowledge and opportunity to commit the crime. But there was still no sign of him, no body, no evidence, just lingering questions. The bloodstains found inside Mike's truck didn't help much either. Too much time had passed for forensic analysis to determine whose blood it was. The only certainty was that it was human. But the most mysterious clue was the handwritten note. "I love you, Diana." Was it Mike's final apology after committing the murder? Or had someone else placed it there to throw off investigators? Despite the growing suspicions of a serial killer, the police couldn't rule out Mike as a suspect. He had a history of violence and also somehow had been in the area when the other couple had been killed. The tube socks tied around the victims' necks in both cases seemed too similar to be a coincidence. Was Mike responsible for all the killings? Or was he a victim himself, caught up in a deadly game? Years went by, with no sign of Mike Reamer. The case turned cold, and the mystery of what happened in those woods remained unsolved. That is, until March 26, 2011, when a hiker stumbled upon something disturbing in the forest near Monroe, Washington. It was a partial human skull. Authorities quickly identified it as belonging to Mike Reamer, the man who had been missing for over 20 years. This discovery shattered any remaining doubts that Mike had been the killer, He, too, had been a victim, murdered in the same woods where Diana had been found. But this raised even more questions. Who killed Mike and Diana? Was it the same person who murdered the other couple, Stephen Harkins and Ruth Cooper? And most haunting of all, how had Crystal ended up in that Kmart, over 30 miles away from the crime scene? Investigators were now sure that Crystal had been driven to the store by the same person who had killed her parents. For 45 minutes, she had sat in silence in the car with her parents' killer, completely unaware of the terror that had taken place in the woods. The discovery of Mike's skull confirmed one thing. He hadn't disappeared or gone into hiding, with the possibility Mike, too, had been a victim. But with his remains offering no clear signs of how he had died, the mystery only grew darker. Could he have been killed by the same person who murdered Diana? If so, who was this person? And more disturbingly, were they still out there? Even with the confirmation of Mike's death, many questions remain unanswered. How did Crystal end up at the Kmart that fateful day? Could she have been driven there by the very person who killed her parents? And why was she spared? To this day, Diana Robertson's case remains unsolved. It stands as a chilling reminder of life's fragility and the eerie coincidences that can haunt our reality. The dense woods of Elba still guard their secrets, and even as time moves on, the shadow of those brutal killings hangs over the community. The truth may never emerge, leaving the tragic story of Crystal, her parents, and the mysterious murders as one of the darkest and most chilling tales from the shadowed forests of Washington. Thanks for watching. Subscribe Dark Films for more news stories.